It started as jokes, memes, light clowning on Instagram, the kind of back and forth everybody laughs at and scrolls past. But somewhere between the posts, the captions, and the quiet deletions, something shifted, and suddenly this wasn't comedy anymore. This was war. Because when Marlon decided to publicly dismiss 50 Cent's latest documentary and paint it as biased, messy, and disrespectful, he didn't just criticize a project. He poked a man who's built an entire legacy on never letting disrespect slide. And this time, Fifth didn't respond with words. He responded with a threat so heavy it stopped the jokes cold. Whispers started flying. Private footage, old parties, locked vaults, the kind of material nobody ever expects to surface until someone hints that it might. According to people watching this unfold in real time, the moment 50 suggested he had something damaging in his possession, everything changed. Posts were deleted. Lawyers were called, statements were rushed out, and suddenly, Marlon wasn't laughing anymore. The internet noticed. And once the internet smells fear, it doesn't let go. What started as commentary has now turned into a countdown. Because if that footage is real, this isn't about opinions, documentaries, or jokes anymore. It's about exposure. It all traces back to a moment that didn't look dangerous at first. A question. A podcast clip, a casual opinion that should have died in the algorithm after 24 hours. Marlon was asked about 50's documentary, and instead of dodging it or keeping it neutral, he leaned in just enough to sound dismissive. Not loud, not reckless. Just confident enough to suggest that what 50 was doing wasn't about truth, it was about revenge. And that's where things went left, because to the outside world, it sounded like Marlon was taking the moral high ground, talking about karma, talking about not kicking a man when he's down, talking about how black men shouldn't tear down other black men in public. On paper, it sounded mature, responsible even, but anyone who knows 50 Cent knows one thing. He doesn't hear morality. He hears disrespect, especially when the name Puff enters the conversation. The history between 50 and Diddy isn't new. It's layered. Old industry tension, power plays, subliminals that never really stayed subliminal. And when Diddy's legal situation exploded into the public eye, 50 didn't retreat. He leaned forward, hard. The documentary wasn't just content, it was a statement, a victory lap, a reminder of who gets the last laugh. So when Marlon brushed it off as skewed, biased, and tasteless, it landed like he'd chosen a side. And in 50's world, neutrality doesn't exist. You're either with him, or you're standing close enough to get hit. The first response was classic Fifth. No press release, no interview, just Instagram. A single image pulled from Marlon's own career, reframed to mock him, paired with a caption that said more by saying less. Keep my name out your mouth. Simple, clean, deadly. Most people would have stopped there. Marlon didn't. Instead of de-escalating, he doubled down. He fired back with an image meant to flip the humiliation. Something historical, heavy, loaded with implication. And for a brief moment, the internet laughed. Screenshots flew, comment sections exploded. It felt like roast culture again, like two celebrities trading jabs for sport. But that moment didn't last, because that's when 50 changed the temperature. He didn't insult Marlon's work. He didn't touch his family. He didn't argue morals. He posted a clip, an old one. Something Marlon himself had said years ago, talking casually about attending Diddy's parties, laughing, smiling, calling them legendary. The kind of clip nobody thinks twice about, until the context changes. And the context had changed. Suddenly, those words didn't sound harmless. Suddenly, they sounded like receipts. Suddenly, people weren't laughing. They were pausing, rewinding, and asking questions that hadn't been asked out loud before. Why was he there so often? What did he see? When did he leave? And more importantly, why did 50 choose that clip now? That's when the internet did what it always does. It connected dots whether they were meant to be connected or not. Marlon felt it immediately. You could hear it in his tone when he went live. The defensiveness, the urgency, the need to clarify before the narrative cemented. He wasn't defending Diddy, he said. He just answered a question. He had an opinion. That's it. Nothing more. But explanations only work when people aren't already suspicious. And suspicion was spreading fast. Then Marlon made another move that shifted the optics. He brought up 50's past. Old allegations, old headlines, old scars the internet never forgets. On paper, it was a smart counter. Flip the spotlight. Change the subject. Remind people that nobody's clean. But to 50, that wasn't debate. That was crossing a line. And this time, he didn't bother with subtlety. He went personal. A post. A video. A caption that wasn't trying to be clever. It was trying to sting. The kind of post designed to provoke, not persuade. Designed to make someone react. And react Marlon did. Now the exchanges weren't just between them anymore. Fans were picking sides. Blogs were rewriting timelines. Old rumors that had lived quietly on forums for years started resurfacing. Blind items, anonymous posts. Whispers that had never gone mainstream suddenly felt louder, and that's when the phrase started circulating. Compromising footage. No one had seen it. No one could confirm it existed. But the way 50 moved suggested he knew something Marlon didn't want public. Not accusations, not opinions. Something visual, something concrete. Something that couldn't be argued away with a statement. According to people close to the situation, the tone behind the scenes shifted overnight. Lawyers started reaching out. Conversations moved off public platforms. Posts slowed down, and Marlon's messaging changed from confident to cautious. He began emphasizing that he left parties early, that he didn't stick around, that whatever people thought happened, he wasn't there for it. But the problem with explanations like that is timing. Once they come after the suspicion, they sound like damage control. And the internet doesn't forgive damage control. By now, the narrative wasn't about Diddy anymore. It wasn't even about the documentary. It was about why Marlon seemed so desperate to distance himself from an image 50 hadn't even fully revealed. That silence from 50? It spoke louder than any post. Because when someone who thrives on chaos suddenly goes quiet, people assume it's because he's waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for maximum impact. Waiting to drop something that changes everything. And if history is any indication, 50 doesn't threaten unless he's holding cards he's ready to play. This was no longer a roast battle. It was a standoff. The damage was already done. Not because anything new had been proven, but because perception had fully taken control. And in the internet age, perception doesn't wait for facts. It decides first, then dares reality to catch up. What made this situation especially dangerous was the silence on one side and the over-explaining on the other. 50 went quiet. No new posts, no captions, no memes, just absence. And absence, when paired with prior threats, feels intentional, calculated, like someone standing in the shadows letting the noise build on its own. Meanwhile, Marlon was everywhere. Every time his name trended, he tried to get ahead of it, clarifying, explaining, repeating that he wasn't defending anyone, that he simply answered a question, that he had no idea about any dark behavior, that he left early, always early. But the more he spoke, the more people felt something was off. Because when someone truly has nothing to hide, they usually don't need to explain themselves this much. Old clips started circulating again. Not ones 50 posted. Ones fans dug up. Interviews where Marlon spoke casually about industry parties, about being outside late, about rooms full of powerful people. None of it was incriminating on its own, but stitched together, slowed down, and reframed with ominous captions, it began to tell a different story. And once that story gained traction, it didn't matter whether it was true. It mattered that it felt believable. This is where the psychology of the situation became impossible to ignore. Marlon's brand had always been built on humor, relatability, and control. He was the guy who joked through discomfort, who disarmed tension with laughs. But now, he wasn't joking. He was serious, defensive, almost rigid. That shift alone raised eyebrows. Then came the rumors. Not new ones, old ones, the kind that had floated quietly for years without ever fully surfacing. Anonymous forum posts, blind items that never named names but hinted just enough. Stories about private hotel arrangements, about inner circles that kept secrets tight, about behavior that didn't match the public image. None of it was verified, none of it could be confirmed. But the timing made it explosive. Because now, every rumor was being filtered through one question. What does 50 know? That's the part people underestimated. This wasn't about Marlon's past. It was about 50's reputation. A man who doesn't bluff. A man who's shown time and time again that when he applies pressure, it's because he's holding leverage. And that's why the lawsuit talk started. Behind the scenes, sources claimed Marlon's team began preparing. Not filing yet, just preparing. Cease and desist drafts, quiet consultations, strategy meetings focused less on denial and more on containment. Because if something was coming, the goal wasn't to fight it publicly, it was to stop it before it ever dropped. That alone shifted the narrative again. Fans noticed the difference. One side was calm, almost entertained. The other looked like it was bracing for impact. And the internet doesn't side with panic. It sides with confidence. Comments started reflecting that shift. People weren't saying Marlon was guilty. They were saying he looked nervous, that he looked like someone trying to outrun a story already chasing him, that if there was nothing there, he'd laugh it off the way he always had. But he didn't laugh. Instead, he kept drawing lines, saying what he would never do, where he would never be, who he would never associate with. And every line he drew made people wonder why he felt the need to draw them at all. Meanwhile, 50 returned just long enough to remind everyone he was still in control. One post, one caption, no explanation. No clarification, just enough to let people know the silence wasn't surrender, it was restraint. And restraint, coming from someone known for chaos, reads like confidence. That post didn't accuse Marlon of anything directly. That was the genius of it. It didn't need to. It let the internet do the work, let speculation fill the gaps, let people argue in the comments, let blogs spin theories, let YouTube thumbnails get darker and more dramatic. At that point, the story had outgrown both men. It was no longer about what happened. It was about what might exist, what could surface, what could end careers if mishandled. And the scariest part wasn't the rumors themselves. It was the idea that someone had proof. Because rumors fade. Proof doesn't. Marlon's camp tried to shift focus again, framing the situation as a moral disagreement. Talking about unity, about not tearing each other down, about how public shaming helps no one. And for a moment, that angle worked. Some people agreed. Some felt the whole thing had gone too far. But then the counter question came. If it's just jokes, why the lawyers? That question lingered longer than any post. By now, even neutral observers could see the imbalance. One man acting like he'd already won, the other acting like he was trying to stop the clock. And in the background, the same threat loomed. Unnamed, unseen, but heavily implied. Whatever 50 had, he hadn't released it. Yet. And that waiting game? That's what turned this from internet drama into something else entirely. Because anticipation is more powerful than revelation. Fear of exposure is worse than exposure itself. And everyone watching could feel it. The storm wasn't over. It was gathering. By the time this reached its third phase, the tension wasn't loud anymore. It was quiet. Heavy. The kind of silence that sits in your chest and refuses to move. Because now, everyone involved understood the same thing. Whatever was coming next wouldn't be undone. This was no longer about online back and forth. It was about control. And control, in situations like this, belongs to whoever speaks last. Marlon's public energy shifted again. No more jokes, no more sparring, just carefully chosen words delivered with caution. He started emphasizing his legacy, his family, his values, reminding people who he was before this moment ever existed. It was a classic repositioning move. Pull the camera back, zoom out, and reframe the narrative around character instead of controversy. But the problem with reframing is that it only works when the audience hasn't already locked onto a storyline. And by now, the storyline had momentum. Every new post from Marlon was read defensively, even when it wasn't meant that way. Every sentence was dissected, every pause analyzed. People weren't listening for what he said. They were listening for what he avoided. And avoidance, whether intentional or not, fed the speculation machine even harder. Behind the scenes, the pressure intensified. According to whispers from industry circles, conversations were happening that never see daylight. Phone calls made late at night, names mentioned quietly, old favors revisited, the kind of damage control that doesn't aim to win, it aims to survive. Because once something visual exists, once something tangible is rumored to be in play, the rules change. You can't argue perception away. You can't talk louder than an image. You can only try to stop it from reaching the public in the first place. That's why the lawsuit talk grew louder, not as an attack, but as a shield. The idea wasn't to go to court. It was to draw a line, to signal consequences, to slow momentum, to remind everyone involved that there were legal costs to continuing this path. Whether that worked or not was another question entirely, because 50 didn't respond. And that silence? It felt intentional. People who've watched him long enough recognize the pattern. He doesn't rush endings. He lets the tension do the work. He lets people exhaust themselves trying to guess his next move. And when he finally acts, it's usually when the audience least expects it. That's what made this moment unbearable for spectators. Nothing happened, no leak, no drop, no confirmation. Just the suggestion that something existed, paired with the knowledge that if anyone would have something like that, it would be him. And that's where the power imbalance truly revealed itself. Marlon was responding to a threat he couldn't see, a weapon he couldn't verify, a narrative he didn't control. And the more time passed without resolution, the worse it became. Because uncertainty breeds fear, and fear forces mistakes. Small ones started appearing. Inconsistencies, slight shifts in wording, emphasis changing from "I wasn't there" to "I left early" to "I don't even remember that night." None of it proved anything, but it gave critics something to latch onto, something to question, something to replay side by side. Meanwhile, 50's calm became part of the story. People weren't asking if he had the footage anymore. They were asking why Marlon seemed so convinced that he did. That question alone kept the rumor alive longer than any actual leak ever could. The blogs ran with it. The comment sections hardened. Neutral ground disappeared. You were either waiting for the drop or waiting for Marlon to shut it down completely. And neither happened. Instead, the situation froze in a state of tension that felt intentional. Like both sides understood that moving next would change everything. One move would turn whispers into headlines. One mistake would turn speculation into permanent association. That's when the deeper realization set in. This wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about vulnerability. About how quickly a public image can crack once people believe there's something underneath it. About how reputations aren't destroyed by proof. They're destroyed by doubt that never gets resolved. And doubt was everywhere now. Fans debated whether this was all smoke, whether 50 was bluffing, whether Marlon was overreacting, whether the internet had gone too far. But even those defending Marlon couldn't ignore one thing. He didn't look like someone unbothered. He looked like someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. And 50? He looked like someone enjoying the wait. At this point, the feud had reached a strange stalemate. No escalation, no resolution. Just the looming possibility of exposure hanging over everything like a storm cloud that never breaks. Some believe that's the end game, that the threat itself was the weapon. That forcing Marlon into a defensive posture was the real victory. Others think this is only a pause, a strategic one, before something far more damaging emerges. Because in this industry, nothing disappears forever. It just gets archived, saved, held onto for the right moment, and if that moment comes, it won't come with a warning. So now, everyone is watching the same thing. Not what's said, not what's posted, but what's released. Because if nothing ever surfaces, this becomes another chapter in hip-hop internet history. Messy, loud, and unresolved. But if something does surface, then this entire feud gets rewritten overnight. And the scariest part? At this stage, Marlon isn't fighting accusations. He's fighting the possibility that someone else controls his narrative. And in a culture where image is everything, that might be the most dangerous position of all. And now, we're left in the eye of the storm. Nobody knows what will drop next. Will 50 finally pull the trigger and release the footage that everyone's been whispering about? Or will Marlon find a way to contain the damage before it explodes into full-blown chaos? The tension isn't just online. It's in every comment, every thread, every discussion across social media. Fans are picking sides, insiders are watching closely, and the public can't stop speculating. One thing is clear. This isn't just a feud. It's a high-stakes chess match where every move, every post, and every silence could change the game forever. As the countdown continues, all we can do is watch, wait, and wonder. Who will make the next move, and how far will this escalation go? The next chapter in this saga is coming, and when it does, the internet will never be the same. Stay tuned, because when the storm finally hits, there's no turning back.